Hey, how's it going everyone? It's me, it's Jinsula. I hope you're having a good day, and welcome to today's Pokemon Go discussion video. Okay, so for the last week, we've been very critical of Niantic regarding the remote raid pass nerfs, and I actually think this is a part of a much bigger issue that I really wanted to address in this video. So yeah, everything that I'm going to be talking about is just based on my own observations regarding Niantic and some constructive criticisms that I do think needs to be addressed. Alright, so with that said, let's roll the intro and get right into it. Alright everyone, so I feel like this video is a long time coming because there's a lot of things that Niantic has been doing over the past year that I really feel like has been major missteps towards Pokemon Go's longevity. When it comes to this game, I think a lot of players have been extremely passionate about it, and of course that's going to lead to a lot of people voicing those frustrations on social media, and I really do think that for the longest time, Niantic hasn't really addressed any of it. I could totally understand that Niantic has a very specific vision for this game and they want to stick to it, and I can appreciate that because if they have a direction for what they want to do with the game, then it's going to make it a lot more concise and a lot more structured moving forward. But even if that is the case, I really feel like there are a few things that Niantic needs to understand when it comes to Pokemon Go, as well as the Pokemon Go community. One of the major concerns that I've had with Pokemon Go for the longest time is that it seems like Niantic is putting this vision of what they want Pokemon Go to be ahead of what Pokemon Go players want. Basically, they are putting the needs of the game ahead of the needs of the players. There seems to be a huge disconnect between Niantic and the Pokemon Go player base. Like, the way that Niantic wants us to play Pokemon Go and the way Pokemon Go players want to play Pokemon Go has never aligned over the past year. In actuality, I think a lot of Pokemon Go players would say that the pandemic era was peak Pokemon Go. And yet, Niantic has continuously strayed away from that rather than adapting to it. I mean, just think about all the major changes that happened in the last several months. Like, we've had Incense nerfed to the ground, we of course had the remote raid pass changes, and of course community days were reduced from 6 hours to 3 hours. A lot of these were quality of life improvements that were implemented during the pandemic, but of course after lockdowns were starting to wind down, Niantic started to roll back on a lot of these changes. Now, the problem is that a lot of these changes were very favored by the Pokemon Go community for a variety of reasons, and they didn't actually hinder a lot of people from going out and playing the game the way Niantic wants us to play. And yet, because they do not align with Niantic's vision for the game, they decided to roll back on a bunch of these changes. Ultimately, what it comes down to is that Niantic refuses to adapt to the Pokemon Go community. Like, if the Pokemon Go community is playing the game a certain way now, instead of building upon that, Niantic is trying to bring the game back to what it was before the pandemic, and that is not going to fly with the Pokemon Go community. Once we've got a taste of how good the game can be with these changes, it's going to be really difficult and really jarring to go back to how it was before these changes. And yes, I totally understand that these were always meant to be temporary, but even so, I really feel like Niantic should have considered just keeping a bunch of them in the game because a lot of players have gotten used to that sort of gameplay, and it's definitely made the game a lot more playable. Like, a lot of these changes were definitely big quality of life improvements. Like, I can understand if they wanted to wind down remote raiding, but when it comes to the Incense and Community Day hours, these were huge benefits to the Pokemon Go community as a whole. The Community Day hours is something that I still have gripes with, mainly because when it comes to community days, there are several Saturdays that I just am not able to do any sort of gameplay during the set hours. So it would have been really nice if there were 3 additional hours for this event so that I at least had a couple of hours that I could utilize to actually participate in these events. But yeah, because Niantic is so gung-ho on bringing the game back to how it was before the pandemic, a lot of people are starting to find that the game is just really unenjoyable at this point. I don't think Niantic realizes just how much the game has evolved as a result of the pandemic. Like, all of the temporary bonuses that they added, they improved a lot of different areas of the game that had a lot of different problems. But because Niantic has failed to see that, they think the game was a lot better back before the pandemic. So they want to bring the game back to that, when we as Pokemon Go players have been saying that the game was a lot worse, and the game would have been a lot more enjoyable if they continued to utilize these pandemic bonuses. bonuses and actually build the game around that. Like I said, if their vision for the game was to get players to go out and play outdoors, well, they could have definitely done that while keeping these pandemic bonuses, and it would have been the best of both worlds. Like, disabled Pokemon Go players and people who live in rural areas could have still enjoyed the game, whereas people who live in busier areas had reasons to go out and play outdoors. So where do we go from here? Well, first and foremost, I really feel like Niantic needs to improve in a lot of different areas. I really think they need to work on their communication. This has been an ongoing issue pretty much since the beginning of the game. And yes, I totally recognize that at the beginning of Pokemon Go, there was very little to no communication. And yeah, even though they've improved in this area, they still have a long way to go. I think one of the things that really frustrated me about the most recent Heroes Niantic movement was the fact that it seemed like Niantic did not learn any of the lessons from the previous Heroes Niantic movement. One of the big complaints that we had back then was that Niantic refused to communicate with the Pokemon Go community, giving reasons to some of their unpopular decisions, as well as trying to listen to the community and provide any kind of acknowledgement or reception to some of the feedback that they were getting. But it seemed like they haven't been doing that, which ultimately resulted in another Heroes Niantic movement. I mean, honestly, this time around, it wasn't even so much the remote raid pass nerfs, but it's more just a culmination of a lot of different problems that were building up over the past several months. I think for a vast majority of players, especially the ones that I've personally talked to, the remote raid pass nerfs were kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back. So yeah, if Niantic wants to improve their game and their relationship with the Pokemon Go community, then what they really need to do is focus in on building up communication. I mean, what's the point of having so many community managers that are active on Twitter and social media if they're not being fully utilized? Like, I follow a bunch of them, and it seems like they're not even tweeting or talking about Pokemon Go at all. Occasionally, they will chime in on certain topics, but they're pretty much radio silent whenever there's something that the community is asking about. I mean, like, why are they being paid to be community managers if they're not doing community manager things? And I'm not even saying, like, this is their fault per se. I'm actually thinking it's more on Niantic that they're not letting them talk and they're not letting them interact with the Pokemon Go community. I can understand that the Pokemon Go community can be very hostile at times, but when it comes to constructive feedback and when it comes to active engagement and conversations, I don't think the community managers are being utilized in the best way. Even back in the day when we had Liz George, like, she was a phenomenal community manager who was always interacting with community members and trying to do her best in being a liaison between the community and Niantic. But even her, she was very much underutilized back then. So yeah, if Niantic wants to make good with the Pokemon Go community, they need to utilize the tools that they already have in place and actually communicate with the community, even if there is just a lot of criticism instead of positive feedback. At the very least, Pokemon Go players want to be acknowledged, and any of the concerns and feedback that they are giving, they want to make sure that that feedback is actually being heard. But because Niantic has been radio silent on pretty much everything, it just feels like Pokemon Go players are constantly being ignored, and their player experiences are not being valued at all. Finally, the last thing that I want to talk about is the fact that Niantic has built up a reputation for being a very greedy game studio, and I don't even necessarily believe that is true. I think they're very passionate, and some of the decisions that they make are not even good business decisions, but in general, it just seems like for the longest time, they've been doing a lot of different things that makes them seem more interested in revenue as opposed to the player experience. One of the leading narratives right now regarding the remote raid pass nerf is that Niantic wants players to go to locations physically so that they can collect geolocation data, which they could sell to advertisers and big corporations for big profits. And if this ends up being a false narrative, then Niantic needs to come out and address that, like directly with the Pokemon Go community. They need to reassure us that all they care about is the player experience, but because of how they've been over the past several months, it really seems the opposite is true. They've had some shady monetization practices with the PokéShop recently, like nerfing the Ultra Box and Adventure Box is a big example, and of course they've also added a whole bunch of ticketed special research things with exclusive Pokémon Pokemon, like with Keldeo, like a lot of these practices are going to look really bad with the Pokemon GO community. I mean, over the past several years before some of these changes, one of the things that was held in high regard when it came to Pokemon GO is that it wasn't greedy and shady when it came to monetization. Like, sure, there were some FOMO mechanics as well as some loot box style mechanics with egg hatching and raids, but at the very least, players did not perceive Niantic as an overly greedy company like EA or Activision Blizzard, but that narrative has changed drastically over time. Nowadays, it seems like Niantic is just as scummy as those other AAA studios, and if Niantic does not want that reputation, then they need to come out and fix it as quickly as possible. The best way they can do that is to fix the game's monetization, like provide us with really good bundle boxes in the Poké Shop, and provide a bunch of freebies that players could utilize. Ultimately, what it comes down to is that there are two things that Niantic needs to value. First, it's the Pokemon GO player's experience. And second, it's the Pokemon GO player's wallet. If they were to make these two aspects of Pokemon GO great, then they're going to change their reputation for the better. And I really hope that happens, because as of right now, it seems like Pokemon GO is in the gutter, and there's just no enthusiasm around this game at all. Pretty much everyone that I've talked to, it seems like their interest in this game has drastically declined, and there's just nothing to look forward to when they open up Pokemon GO. It really feels like a very bad time to be a Pokemon GO player right now. On top of a lot of players boycotting the game right now, there's just a lot of people who are just not enthusiastic about the game at all. Even with the remote raid pass nerfs, like for the players that did not even care about that, there just hasn't been any good content in Pokemon GO. There hasn't been anything exciting in terms of raids, and there just hasn't been any good content when it comes to events and new Pokemon releases. So yeah, Niantic has a lot of work to do when it comes to Pokemon GO, and I really hope they start today, because this game is pretty much on the ropes, and I'm really worried that Pokemon GO is not going to last for the next couple of years. But yeah, that's pretty much going to be it for this video. Definitely share your thoughts regarding everything that I talked about in this video down below in the comments. What do you think Niantic should do in order to rebuild a good reputation with the Pokemon GO community? Definitely share those thoughts, and let's have a great discussion. And if you ended up enjoying this video, make sure you hit that thumbs up button and subscribe if it's your first time here. And don't forget that little bell so you can stay up to date on whenever I upload videos. And I want to give a quick shout out to my patrons on Patreon. You make this channel content possible. If you want to support my channel in any way, big or small, then do consider checking out the links in the description below. For all my patrons, they get a permanent spot on my in-game friends list. So if you are interested in doing anything with me in Pokemon GO, like remote raids, then do consider becoming a patron on my Patreon. But yeah, that's going to be it. I'm Jinsula. Be safe, have fun, love yourself, and I'll catch you all later.